Hello, everyone. This is David March. Welcome to the Growth Mindset Podcast. If you've been following me, this is season 2. And, on this podcast, talk about different things, different businesses, different ideas, mostly leadership, mostly business growth. And today we have a special guest, Michael. And Michael, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, thanks, Dave, for the opportunity. Happy to be here. I'm Michael Yinger. I work in talent acquisition, primarily in outsourcing and support a number of clients in terms of their hiring externally. I've got several decades of business experience, both in talent acquisition, but also in transportation and consulting. So I think it's exciting to be here and talk about leadership, Dave, because that's, as we talked about, such a critical topic, no matter what industry you're in.
Yeah, no matter what. And I've been many years in recruiting as well. So, I understand the whole talent acquisition space. And, when I was in that field, what I did find a lot of times was even if we got a great hire and we did really good, having them stay there and getting their kind of the return on the investment, if you will, the employee stay there for years on end. It does come down to leadership that the company has. So, maybe let's break down kind of what aspects of leadership really make the difference. What would you say the first thing would be?
I like the question. There are a lot of facets of leadership which are going to make the difference. I think that there are skills, but then there are also personality traits that go into it. So I think, for example, if you're going to be successful as a leader, as opposed to somebody who simply directs people, you got to be empathetic. That doesn't mean that you have to give in to whatever issue is in front of you, but you do have to understand the human condition. You got to be a listener. I think you got to be willing to share. And that's something that sometimes gets lost, right? You see a lot of articles about leaders who take credit for everything that's done by their people. And I find that in the long run, you don't end up being a leader. You end up becoming a manager, because people will do what you say, but it doesn't mean they're following you. The distinction there, in my mind, is, do you really get the best out of people if they're just doing what you say? There was a term I learned early in my career called malicious obedience. I had two people working for me, and they did not get along. They sat back to back in a cubicle, and they would email each other, and they would do exactly what they were told. And it didn't matter what I said. It didn't matter anything else. It was malicious obedience. These are things that you as a leader have some control over. How do you show up for your people? How do they see you show up? Are you actually being genuine in terms of understanding what's going on with them, even if you can't do anything about it? Even if you can't change whatever it is that is causing them an issue. I do some mentoring, and one of the things I said recently to one of my mentees is it's never the issue that's confronting you that is causing whatever the challenge is. With that person, there's something going on. And that's the empathy aspect of it. You got to be able to break it down. You got to be able to see inside. Is this the issue that we're talking about, or is there something else that's driving them? There's something else that's peeking over their shoulder that, they're angry with the client, and the client is complaining about their anger. But what's the source of that anger? They're frustrated with the assignments that you give them. What's the source of that frustration? And it might be that they're not comfortable with the work, or it might be that they're not comfortable with their situation, that they're worried about the fact that they can't buy an air conditioner to fix their house up. A lot of things go into being a leader. Yeah, it's hot out here. Yeah, you and I are both in the South, not so far apart, and it is hot out here. That's all part of it. It's showing that you understand the human condition, even if it's not in your power to change the human condition, and that is confronting with this particular individual. So I've given you a bunch of different things. I think that it's anybody that tells you you can categorize leader or leadership in one or two things is not really considering how complicated that sort of a role is.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that came to mind. First, when you said back to back sending emails to each other, it almost reminded me of like two people like sitting on like a dinner date texting each other. It's like, why even get together? It's why even get together? There's no point in this.
Yeah. It's and how do you break down those barriers between people, or between you and the people, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah,
it may
you
be
know, that's a good topic
uh,
too.
yeah,
That's a really good
yeah, yeah,
topic. You know, in terms of breaking down the barriers, you know, one of the things that for me that I always go to, and I said a lot in my other episodes, and you know, I was working with a leadership coach one time as well. We always talked about the psychological safety to be one of the big pieces.
yeah,
And then, you know, it's like, do they feel safe to open up to you? Do they feel like you're on like a hairpin trigger? And if you say something, you're going to get real angry, and then and you're not going to listen to them. And then they don't feel safe psychologically to really want to work for you harder and want to kind of do anything more than what the minimum is. You know what I'm
yeah.
saying?
Yeah, I like the term that you've introduced, the psychological safety. I think it's actually kind of a two-edged sword, right? You give people the safe space to talk about what's going on and what they feel. You might hear some things you didn't want to hear.
Yeah.
And then how do you react to that, right? I had somebody 6:15 this morning blowing me up in Teams, and I went back and said, "Okay, safe space. I get your frustration. I understand the issue that is bothering you, and
Mhm.
let's bring it back to how do we resolve the issue." Right. And the response I got back was, yeah, I didn't have breakfast yet. And so, we're all good. But you got to give people that space, and you got to be able to roll with it. That's the other thing that somewhere along the line I picked up the sort of the wisdom, so to speak, that you don't complain down, you complain up. That the people who are working
Yeah.
for you, who look to you for guidance, they deserve your intention as well as attention, and they don't need to hear how bad your day is or the problems that you're
Yeah.
having. Now, you go the other way. You got to go somewhere for the conversation, right? Everybody has a time and a place that they need to unburden themselves, and so it's an interesting balance of not so much being a friend, although you might be a friend, but being a willing listener. And I mean, I had a client just recently unload on me, and she apologized and said, I'm unloading on you so I don't unload on my boss. And I said, no problem, I can handle it.
Yeah. 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 I mean, and sometimes it's just about, you know, acknowledging, right? I mean, if they want to speak, they want to talk about something. Okay, I hear you. You know,
Yeah,
validating, acknowledging. Yeah, I hear you. I know it's rough. Yeah, you know, whatever the deal is. But you know, then you have to kind of get to a point where you take some action on that, and you know, work
yeah,
together on a solution. I think that's kind of the challenge a lot of times, because you can definitely create a safe space. You can definitely create, you know, psychological safety so that they can, you know, feel like if they're you know, you're vulnerable, they're able to speak and all these different things. But then it's like, okay, once the, you know, everyone, they cleared the air, if you will, what's the next step, right?
right,
How do we push
right.
forward onto what we do next?
Yeah, yeah. That's that. What I see that as grounding. You have to take the situation. You've diffused the energy a bit,
Hmm.
and now what's the problem you're trying to solve, and get it back to sort of a tactical level. That what you're doing is you're demonstrating leadership, I think, in that kind of a context, because not only working through with them whatever the problem is, you're showing them a methodology for how to work through a problem. And I mean, early in my career, I was a teacher, a college professor for a few years, and so I have that. I've been told I have that sort of professor mentality where it's all about the learning, whether I'm learning. I take mentoring, for example. I take that as a two-way street. I learn things from the people that I'm mentoring, and I hope that they're learning things from me. That's the intention, right? Two-way street. And the same thing with my people. I expect them to go on and do better things. And how am I helping them develop to move in that direction? So I mean, it's what I do every day. My kids say, "Well, what do you do?" I say, "I tell people what to do." That's what I do all day long. But you have to do it in such a way that they are engaged to do it, right? And that's the you've started the whole thing off with it. That's the whole leadership component. How. how do you get the most out of people willingly? That's
Yeah. I mean,
leadership.
it's like I always think about, like, there was, I think it was like Simon Sinek one time. He had like a person come up to him. He's like, "How can I get the most out of my people?" And it's almost like a washcloth. They're like, "How can like
Yeah, right.
squeeze
Yeah,
them dry of everything they have?"
yeah,
That's how you get the
yeah,
most of them. It's like that's not willingly. That's like, manipulating. That's
yeah,
so there's a difference, right? There's a big difference there because there's the, well, how can I get the most out of my people by, this kind of malicious kind of way? Well, is there a way to get the most of your people, but really more in like a benevolent kind of way, a way that is more nurturing and caring. And there's the whole idea where it's like in coaching, it's like the person kind of finds the answers themselves, but finds it, like, the answers in
yeah,
themselves, and then they can kind of do the work. It's like it's almost like, for some reason, there's like a Taoism quote
yeah,
coming into me of like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
the master does nothing, but everything gets done, something like this.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I had a business partner for a startup earlier in my career, and he was a practitioner of the Socratic method. He would never answer a question. He would ask you another question. And that
Yeah, the
was his
Socratic method.
methodology. That was his methodology was, to draw the best out of you in the circumstance without telling you the answer. And quite often, maybe he didn't even have the answer. This
Yeah.
was his way of getting you to come to the answer. I can't possibly do everything that my people do,
Mhm.
either from a skill set perspective or from a capacity perspective. So I have to have them willing to reach over and above themselves, and then so on and so on. It's leverage, right? I'm not by any stretch an individual contributor. I would not get nearly as much done if I tried to operate that way. And that to maximize that, which is I think the point you were getting at, there has to be a willingness to participate. People will do what they need to do. I actually sold insurance early in my career, and one of the catchphrases they taught us to try and convince us that selling insurance was the right thing to do. And I'm not saying it's not the right thing to do. It just wasn't for me. But American companies today will pay you just enough so that you work just hard enough so that you don't quit, and then you
Yeah.
have to work just hard enough so they don't fire you. It's kind of a harsh reality, and yet that's the environment that we all operate in, right? It's an environment of scarcity by and large, particularly today. Costs are going up. Things cost more for people to do things. You have to do more with less. Productivity improvements, all those kinds of things. And so leadership, I think, is demonstrating to people how participating in that kind of an environment is good for them. What do they get out of it? And I will be the first to tell somebody, if this isn't working for you, I will support you finding something different. And this is what
Yeah.
we're doing. This is what we're doing. We're not doing this other thing. It's, that's just not going to happen. There's an element of leadership too, right? Which is
Yeah.
telling the truth to
No.
people, and even sometimes when it hurts or when it's hard to
Yeah.
swallow. Maybe that's a better way to think about it. Truth doesn't hurt, but people do
Yeah.
sometimes have
Yeah. Hard
trouble
to swallow.
accepting it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Agreed. Yeah. I think that, especially when it comes to, leadership and, let's say, a business sense too, it's like, I think that there's an idea also about, alignment and coordinating. I think coordinating and creating a consensus and creating alignment is challenging, especially, when there's, a lot of agency, and there's lots of different, freedom, and everyone comes at every different different problems from different angles. Well, it's like, which way is right? Is there a right way? And then, then that kind of comes into the idea of control. When someone tries to
Mm,
control, well, everything has to be done this way. And so I think that's another challenge, because if you want to give people agency, you want to give people creative freedom, you also can't control them and tell them exactly, if you didn't do exactly what I told you to do, you did it wrong. So there's actually a challenge there as well when it comes
yeah,
to leadership.
a lot of what I hear you describing, I would term as guardrails. And in any kind of a situation, they're guardrails. Now,
Yeah.
I actively seek out the guardrails, not so that I can break them, but so that I understand them and I can work with them, right? That's what I'm doing at my position. And at different levels in the organization, sometimes you have to define the guardrails. I said I was in transportation early in my career, and I was managing logistics for a shipping company, and I was supporting a service center. There were 200 customer service reps, and these people were making decisions all day long about how to move freight from one place to another. And I empowered them to make $5,000 decisions to order a container of cargo to be trucked across the country because they would make that decision based on what the customer situation was. But there was another decision, which was $50, that I didn't let them make because I knew they would make the $50 decisions all day long without thinking about it, and they would bankrupt us. So I took the $50 decision-making authority away from them, but I gave them the $5,000 decision-making authority because people think differently about those kinds of things. And so I was defining the boundaries of their world. You can do this because I know you're going to take the steps necessary. Now, I still watched, right? I still was overseeing it, but it's defining for people how you want them to operate while giving them, and you talked about giving them the agency to operate within that, or even beyond that. What does beyond that look like? What are things that you can do to move things forward in your environment? It's a situational thing, right? It's not the same for everybody. It's not the same for every kind of role. And you got to be willing to be clear about what you see the boundaries are so that people can be successful within those boundaries, because you don't want them to get frustrated, feel like they don't have the authority to move forward, because then you end up making all the decisions.
Yeah,
And
I think
so,
that's a big part of leadership. I think this is a big part of leadership.
letting go of things that I could make this decision all day long, and I find myself doing that a lot. Is I say, well, what do you want to do? And it's not because I don't have an opinion, but if it's always my opinion, then how are they developing? How are they moving on? Am I really leading them, or am I just directing them? Now,
Yeah, I
again,
like
I'm
that.
not afraid of
I like
making a
that.
decision. And are my decisions always going to be the right ones? No, not necessarily, because I may not have all the data either. So it's a balance that the good leaders are always, you're adjusting yourself in the moment. You have to what's the temperature in the room, what's the nature of the decision, who is the person that you're interacting with. You got to be willing to make those kind of judgments and do them pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, that's key. That's key, and it's definitely difficult to do sometimes, especially setting up the guardrails, setting up the boundaries, and yeah, I mean, I think that's a big piece that a lot of people have challenges with. Yeah, yeah. In terms of the podcast here, you typically just do 20-minute episodes. You don't go too difficult, not too crazy. But as we, and you say close down. Is there any other main concepts of leadership you think that should be known?
I talked about the temperature of the situation, and sometimes you have to meet heat with heat, and other times you meet heat with cool,
There it
and
is.
that becomes a judgment situation, right? I had a difficult conversation with a client, and they came in hot, and I just let it cool, and they got through the heat, and it worked, right? In that situation, I was in a conversation with one of my team, and they were very concerned and very angry, and so I gave them a little bit of heat back to sort of have them sit up and notice what was going on in the situation. And so it gets back to the general theme that we're talking about. There's no magic bullet. There's no single thing that works in every scenario. And maybe that's the point, right? You got to be willing and able to adapt to the person, to the situation, to the circumstances, and do that in a way that you don't get paralyzed, because you could put this through some big process and you'd never get anywhere, right? You got to,
Sure.
you got to be willing to move.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes, yeah. Well, I think being adaptable is really key. That's a real important piece too. If you're, and then in some cases it's true, right? Some cases you gotta hold your guns, you gotta stand your
Yeah,
ground.
right.
Some cases you gotta be able to be adaptable and open to some change. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
it's one of
exactly,
those
exactly.
things. Yeah,
Yeah, I love that. Love that.
yeah. So yeah, as we kind of close down this episode here for the Growth Mindset podcast, is there any ways where people can find you, Michael? Anyway, people say, oh, I like what this guy said. How can they find you?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, easy to find. Michael Yinger on LinkedIn, moderately active on Twitter. It's there's only so hours in the day to mess around with social media, right? So I have a
Yeah.
fairly narrow set of, but that's the easiest way is Michael Yinger on LinkedIn, easy to find.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks for your time today. This was the Growth Mindset Podcast. You can find me here on LinkedIn as well, Innovative Marketing Solutions. And if you want to stay tuned for the next episode, we got another one coming out soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.